Yeah. Hello everyone, I'm Katrina Fox and I'm delighted today to be interviewing Diane and Jacob Anderson-Minshall. Now Diane and Jacob refer to themselves as co-conspirators in life and love. They're both very prolific writers, authors and journalists, and they've been involved very much with the lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans and sex and or gender diverse media publishing, as well as being very active members of the queer community. And they've got a very interesting story. Diane and Jacob started out as a lesbian couple as Diane and Suzy. Then a few years into their relationship, Suzy transitioned to become Jacob. Now, unlike a lot of couples whose relationship doesn't survive this situation where one partner transitioned, Diane and Jacob have not only survived, but they've positively blossomed. And they're now sharing their story in a fabulous new memoir called Queerly Beloved, A Love Story Across Genders. It's a brilliant book. I highly recommend it. It's fascinating and very much no holds barred revelations of what it's been like for both of them. So without further ado, welcome to Jacob and Diane.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
One of the things I loved about the book is that it was so honest. Like, it was a really raw kind of, as I said earlier, no holds barred. Like, you obviously poured a lot of yourselves and your self-awareness and your reflections. Why did you decide to write the book and share your story, and why now?
Well, you know, for us, we'd been together 15 years when we transitioned. We always say we transitioned as a couple. But we've been together 15 years when we transitioned, and at that time, when Jake was first coming out, we, you know, all we had heard from other people was, you know, that we would break up. So we kept hearing all these breakup stories, and we kept hearing kind of, I think we call them like trans 101 myths, you know. So a lot of them were like, you know, he's gay, so he's going to, you know, be into guys, so he's probably going to leave you for a guy. I heard that a lot. I heard, you know, there's no way you could stay together because you're a lesbian. And you know, we heard so many stories about breakups that went, you know, and we were really dedicated to, you know, not having that turn out to be our story. And it did require some work, but we decided at that time that, you know, you know, when we got through all this, it would be a good thing for us to actually share our story, just so other people know, you know, that you can make it through this. This is not, you know, the big bad that everybody breaks up, that this changes everything for everybody.
It's great because it is a new narrative around it, because I think there is this assumption that, because it's such a big thing, that would break up. I mean, why do you think so many couples don't survive and do end up breaking up?
Well, gosh, you know, I mean, there's so little support for relationships in our world anyway, and you add, you know, the transgender factor to it. I think that people really think of gender as something that is, you know, that's fixed and it's unmutable, and so is, you know, orientation and attraction. And so, you know, one of the most common things we hear from women who are married to men who come out as, you know, as a trans woman, we hear those women say, but I'm not a lesbian, and they split up, and you know, vice versa for women who have been in relationships with other women, and then their partner comes out as a man, and so they're like, but I'm not straight, or I'm not bisexual. And in a lot of ways, you know, I think that, you know, I understand there's so little support for people staying together. Big change, you know, that you're just foisting on me. Like, as the partner, you're foisting this giant change on me, and I never planned for it, and I didn't marry that person, I married this person, or, you know, that kind of thing. So I think that's where, you know, culturally we start off, and I think that's where when people are getting support from their family and their friends, I think that's where their family and friends are coming from. And so, you know, when those people are telling you to break up and to leave and make things easier for both of you, you know, I think a lot of people buy that argument. Because it's work still. You got to do work with it.
You do have to do work. One of the things that was surprising to me when we were doing this, starting this book, I wanted to sort of find out if there are statistics about how often couples break up. And there's not a lot that's really been done to test. Big survey done a few years ago in the United States, and one of the things they did ask was, you know, if you were partnered before you came out, and if that partner left you. And actually, for people who had been previously, you know, like seen as women and now changed to transition to men, their partners were more likely. Well, no, actually, it's the other way around. Women were more likely to stay with their partners, whether they were with someone who went from male to female or they were with someone who went from female to male. A female partner was more likely to stay, and a male partner was more likely to leave. But the percentages were, it was definitely below 50% that stay, but it was really surprisingly high. It was more than we had ever imagined, and I think that's amazing, and that's just a story that sort of isn't being heard.
Absolutely. I mean, did they say why? Like, why women are more likely to stay?
Well, I mean, I think you've got to look at superior. And I think, too, you've got to look at, you know, some of the issues around, you know, sexuality and sexual fluidity and identity. And I think there might just be a less fixed feeling about that from women than there are from men.
Yeah, and women also, again, I think women have traditionally always been the person to hold a relationship together. And I think that remains true, that women are sort of the glue in a relationship often. And, you know, if they put the work in, it can last. If they don't, then it's very hard to keep it together.
You mentioned just then, Diane, about the support or otherwise of family, and I know that you had some very mixed reactions when Jacob transitioned. Talk a little bit about some of the negative reactions that you got, particularly from within the lesbian community, how that impacted you and how you coped with it.
Yeah, you know, at the very beginning, that was one of our main concerns. I mean, we really initially thought about the idea of sort of staying closeted about the change, which would have been a huge thing for us because we, you know, we've definitely been out for a very, very long time. So, but partly that was because we were sort of worried about the impact it would have on my career, because I'm sort of a professional lesbian, and I was editing the largest lesbian magazine in the U.S. at the time, and had been for, you know, several years, and so we were very worried about that. And I remember when I went and talked with my publisher, Frances Stevens, you know, just to say, you know, I'm going to lose my job, you know, what should I do here? You know, she was very supportive, and I think that set a standard, because that basically, for the company I was in, that basically set a standard that anybody that didn't like it, you know, that issue was theirs to deal with. That wasn't my issue to. You know, for her, I was still, you know, the most qualified person to lead this magazine, and I was still, you know, lesbian identified and stuff. So, you know, I did have an employee who had, you know, who raised a great deal of concern about it, and that person ended up leaving the company. And overall, you know, I've definitely had some negative reaction, and I have, you know, I still continue to have negative reaction. If you know, I wrote an article for The Advocate not too long ago talking about, you know, being attracted to transgender people, and I got lambasted for it, you know, you know, there's a number of trans critics who said, if you're attracted to trans people, then you're fetishizing them, you know, and I had a number of, you know, other people say, you know, stuff about my sexuality and what that meant for me. And, you know, we did an article for, and Jake was early in his transition, and it was about men who are transitioning, FTMs, and I remember afterwards, you know, I was saying that I continued to love my husband, and I stayed with him, and you know, and I still considered myself queer, and I know, and that we still had sex and all that kind of stuff, and And I know afterwards Dan Savage said something to the effect that my, sexual orientation was fluid to the point of ridiculousness, But I think that's, there's a sort of that negative connotation out there, but I haven't in a lot of ways had as much negative reaction from other lesbians as one really thinks, I could have. And in fact, we used to go to like Pride festivals, and when I was still running the magazine, we would go to Pride festivals and have booths where we talk with people. And I do speaking engagement and stuff, and very often, we will get approached by women who are at the moment, lesbian identified and usually butch, and they will come to us and they will say, I want to come out, or I want to transition, but I'm afraid to tell my partner, or I don't know how to tell my partner, or I know my partner will leave me, so I'm just going to pretend that it's not here, that kind of thing. But they're in agony, so in a lot of ways, I think that there's a great more, coalescence between the lesbian world and the transgender world, especially transgender men, since,
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a place in our queer community, in the lesbian community, for trans men who used to be lesbians, definitely. Where there's not as much place is, it's still been less women, and we've been less supportive of trans men who don't identify as gay or who want to leave the community. I think a lot of it, though, is still, we're still so invisible that sometimes we don't get negative stuff because people just don't realize it. Even with Diane's job being, sort of outing us constantly, it's amazing how often we are someplace where it's, completely new to people, and they don't necessarily respond, negatively. But they're very, it's just new, so they're like very questioning and want to know what I'm doing in some lesbian space, or want to know why, I'm here with Diane and all those things. So
more often now, though, we, people see us and just assume us to be straight, unless we're making a big deal about it, which we often are.
Yeah.
Interesting you say that, because I'm curious about the whole thing around identity, because it's such a big thing for the queer community. Like, we've got raging debates going on at the moment within the trans community around certain terms that should or shouldn't be allowed to use. The word dyke, even. My friend Rose Collis is a performer in the UK. She's been a active political lesbian for around 30 years, and her Christmas show was banned by this student group. They said we can't advertise it because it's got the word dyke in the title, and that kind of, obviously sets up these debates, and they're obviously debates that sometimes divide our communities.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why identity is so important, particularly for the queer communities?
Well, I mean, we're kind of founded on identity politics. I think that we're a movement, especially the LG portion of the LGBT, was founded on, both sexual liberation and then identity politics. And so we've got several decades of that behind us. And I think that that's, is sort of like, helped us really get some of the political advances. At least in the U.S., it's helped us get some of the political advances we've gotten. But very often, I think that we're trying to do a broad rainbow umbrella over all of us, and sometimes there's just going to be, dichotomies between us if we can't see beyond these smaller infractions. I
think there's also, a lot of this to me seems like we're setting these boundaries and policing these boundaries as a community. Where, who we are as gays and lesbians was very defined in, the 70s, the 80s. It was very defined by being the other from the straight community. The more we become just like the straight community, the more we have these rights and we start seeing ourselves as just like everyone else, the more we question where those boundaries really are and where they should be. And I feel like this is
well. There's a lot of policing those boundaries.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the way that we've won political advantages like marriage equality and the removal of don't ask, don't tell, and those kinds of things has been by by showing people we are just like you. And so that's been a very important message, you know, for political lobbyists and activist groups to like get that out there. But what that does is it leaves all the people in the margins, and unfortunately, even though bisexual people make up a larger percentage than all the other groups in that umbrella, they're completely marginalized. Trans people are completely marginalized. People with HIV are still completely marginalized, even though they make up, you know, a huge swath of the gay community. And
even
so,
just people who are sort of more obviously queer, who are different, who are, you know, unusual in any way. You know,
oh yeah, I mean, in terms of
whitewash all of that. And,
I mean, I think that's part of the big battle we're having right now is, you know, the battle in terms of, you know, how the battle's going on around the words that should or should not be used to talk about trans women in particular, because these are words used against trans women, you know, generally, not trans men. But you know, we're talking about what words can be used and who can use those words, and it seems to be pitting a battle between those women and men who perform in drag. But many of those men are, you know, their gender expression when they're out of their drag outfits is still feminine and flamboyant and girly, and so, for lack of a better phrase, you know, and so they are definitely, these people, you know, doing the sort of gender fuckery, like the, oh, I can say that on Google Hangouts, sorry. Suddenly I was like, oh no, hit the on button.
For CNN.
But yeah, like Conchita, you know, I think that's, you know, that confuses the American public so much, and the straight public, I should say. And so it sets up, like, you know, again, there's a big debate over that win today, you know, like what that means and how that sets us back, and if it, you know, makes it so now people are, again, opponents use these people as tropes, you know. So now their argument about how trans people, we shouldn't let trans people in bathrooms because it'll be a man in a dress and he'll come in and molest you. And then you have a guy in a beard wearing, you know, female garb and winning with a female name, and people, straight people are like, see, that's exactly what we're talking about. That's what's going to be in your bathroom, you know. And so, yeah, but so in some ways we are at odds. You know, we're going to continue to be at odds because it's a huge umbrella that we're talking about, you know.
Yeah, one of the things I think that's interesting too about this idea of these, you know, what words you can use and who fits in different things, is that's where I see like the policing going on in terms of our relationship. Is again other people deciding what we are allowed to call ourselves, how we are allowed to identify. So because we're together and we're man, women, you know, then we are being told that we can only identify as straight, or we cannot identify as lesbian, or we cannot identify as gay, or we cannot identify as queer. And those things, again, are very much from, that's not the, like, each person trying to hold their own thing. It's very much of a, you know, we're trying to define what these different words mean, and we're policing you out of this identity. We're saying, no, you don't actually get to be inside this identity. And that's, again, when identity matters so much to us, it's very difficult for somebody else to tell you how you're allowed to identify.
Yeah, we had a lot of that when we first transitioned, and you know, a lot of people would say to me, well, you know, if you're going to stay with him, you can't be a lesbian. That, you know, that's sort of the bottom line. And or so I guess you're not a lesbian anymore. We would hear that a lot and stuff. I would hear it.
Thank you,
and what?
What was your response to that? How did you, when people said that to you, what was going through what were you experiencing when they said that? Did you kind of think, well, maybe there I am? Or did you go through like a questioning kind of?
No, at the very beginning, I was like, F you, because, you know, I was very defiant and I didn't want to be told who I was or what I could do at the time. I definitely like thought more about it. And then in addition, I would also try to turn it back on them, and I would say, well, so if your partner's genitals change tonight, then would you stop being a lesbian? Is that, you know, are you defined by your partner's genitals? Because for trans people, they always break it down into genitals. That's the big thing, right? So I just kind of would throw that back at them and say, you know, okay, so if you woke up and your partner had a penis tomorrow, would you stop being a lesbian? Would you stop being in love? Like,
right, and that's what always bothered me as a feminist, is why is a decision I make, how can that change her right to identify as something? That's a decision I made. Like, how does that have anything to do with her ability at self-expression and self-identity? Like, so my feeling is, again, you know, you're not defined by what I do. You're defined by who you are and how you feel and what your life is and what's true to you. So, you know, I do think that Diane has a great way to be able to turn that around and say, you know, so if, you know, again, if your husband loses a penis in the war, does he, you know, stop being, you know, does it suddenly stop having a, you know,
is he not a man?
Is he not a man? Is he?
Yeah.
You know, these different things that.
Because people kind of think of these things as very black and white, and they're just not, you know.
What have you seen in terms of your own, Diane, your own fluidity in regards to sexuality? Like, do you identify as a lesbian sometimes, or queer, or have you discovered kind of more a bisexual aspect to yourself? Like, how has your kind of journey in terms of your sexuality developed over time?
Yeah, you know, it's been 8 years since Jake transitioned, and so yeah, I definitely, like, you know, the first year was very, very defiant about being lesbian identified, and then after that, you know, I have, you know, given it like a great deal of thought, and generally, you know, I've always liked the word queer. I liked it when we first came out. I adopted the word lesbian professionally just because it was, you know, it was more liked by people, basically. You know, it was female identified, and more people liked it, and a lot of people still dislike the word queer, even though I love it, and it's always felt like my word. So, and then today, you know, I'm more often now, I will sometimes say I'm a lesbian identified bisexual, or I'm a bisexual identified lesbian. I don't know which. I just kind of go with it, and I know that, you know, I have the greatest alliance to women who are queer, who are lesbian or bisexual, or somewhere else find them in that same banner, and so that's where my loyalties lie, and my affections. But I also know that part of, you know, being with a man and being sexually attracted to at least trans men, not necessarily cisgender men, that I, you know, it does move me up to, you know, I feel like I should make some kind of political statement in unity with the bisexual community, you know, just like recognizing I'm having a bisexual experience, absolutely, you know, and so I need to, like, recognize that as well.
Yeah, and I think what, you know, one of the things that's interesting is that it definitely has changed. Like, we've seen Diane's sexuality kind of change, and my sexuality kind of change, and definitely, like, you know, when I first transitioned, it was really like, well, she was still sexually attracted to me, but only me, you know, and now she's really recognizing that there are other trans men she finds attractive, and there are other things. So that has been, you know, an interesting growth and an interesting transition.
How do you feel about that, Jake, that Diane finds other trans men attractive?
Oh, Jake does too. Don't worry.
I'm all good with it. You know, I've always been.
Jake's sexuality is kind of murky too.
Yeah.
So.
And I feel like I've always felt like Diane's sexuality is, you know, it's hers. So, you know, I don't feel the need for it to be confined to certain things. I feel it's fine. I do know that there are other trans men who find Diane's sexual gaze somehow like suspect because she still identifies as a lesbian, and they, you know, are like, well, then how are you're lumping us in with lesbians instead of in with the real men, and that's not fair. And, you know, again, that's not my issue. I don't see that to be a problem. That's not what I think is happening. But I do know that, again, we've had some real changes and really interesting, like, you know, discussions about that, because, again, I think probably when I was younger, I would never have thought that sexuality was something that could alter.
Yeah, and it's not a very popular stance either
No.
to say that you have any control of your sexuality. So yeah, I get lambasted a lot whenever I write about that.
Now, it's interesting because not only have you survived, or can I say survived, you've come through the Jacob's transition, but also you also went through the time when Jacob had an accident and went from being an able person to disabled person. And you write in the book how you were in a situation where Diane, I guess, was the main breadwinner and was supporting you. And I'm kind of curious, as I would imagine I could foresee in those circumstances there being some resentment on either side. Did you ever go through that? And if so, how did you deal with it?
You know, I've been the breadwinner for a very long time, and I like, you know, I don't mind it. I kind of like having the power, and I don't have control. I mean, you know, I think that we share that and stuff, but I like, you know, being able to care for my partner, and I think that it's you know, one of those people who always wanted to be able to take care of myself and, you know, do things myself and stuff. So I much prefer it rather than the other way around. But I think that that certainly, you know, you can't go through these things without occasionally having some kind of resentments and stuff. And I think that part of Jake's spirit is that he's, you know, sort of a great wanderer, you know, a kind of a great wandering soul, and that he's, you know, spent a lot of his life trying to find himself and trying to find his fit in this world. And so, you know, before he came out as trans, you know, he had a lot of, like, ups and downs career-wise and stuff, whereas I've had a very, you know, steady, you know, rise in my career. I've known what I wanted to do since I was 12, and I'm doing it, and, you know, and he's had such a different trajectory and stuff, and so I think that, you know, where he lends stability in that one area, I lend, in particular areas, I lend stability in this area, and I think that that's, you know, I mean, I hope that's given him the freedom to sort of, you know, be comfortable with himself and become who he is, and understand that, you know, disability is just, you know, it's just another change. It's sort of, you know, it's just another thing that we go through, and at some point, I think the statistics are like 1 out of every 3 people, you know, will be disabled sometime in their lifetime. So he's just getting it out of the way early.
Yeah, it's definitely part of it for me has been because of the timing. It absolutely has, you know, colored my experience of being male, and so I have a very different experience of being male than someone who is able-bodied and went through the same experience.
About that.
Yeah, you know, partly because in our society, disability feminizes men. I mean, that's how it's seen. It's very
like people open doors for you, and people,
men who would never open doors for another man, they open doors for me. Old men with crutches open the doors for me. Like I'm, you know, on the totem pole, just some very needy guy. You know,
he is a very needy guy.
Yeah, you're just not seen as very masculine. You're not, you know, strong. And also I think it feeds into these fears that men have. That really, like, was what we experienced after, you know, I'd been a park ranger, and I've been the thing I'd most recently been, and I loved that job. And then I was hurt, and, you know, most of my friends at work were men, and most of them stopped talking to me after I was hurt. And part of it was because we could really see, like, speaking to them, how uncomfortable I made them. Like, there was just something about seeing my inability to do work, about being so, having control taken away and having all these things that they identified with taken away, that really almost repelled them from me, because it just, you know, sort of solidified this idea of something that they actually feared, I think. So, you know, there's some of that stuff that is always going on for me because I do stuff that's different. And, you know, one of the things I talk about in the book is, you know, whether I stand to pee or not. And that's really important to some trans men. It's very important to them that they stand and urinate. And I don't stand and urinate, and that's because of my disability. It's not because I'm trans or not trans or whatever. And
it's actually because he's lazy, I think.
I'm glad that you can see that, but that's not. So, but, you know, also I know a lot of trans men who would never, I mean, like, who are actually afraid if they sat down in men's restroom that they would not be safe. And I don't.
That they would be outed because of it.
And and therefore be at risk.
Yeah.
You know, violence.
Yeah.
So that isn't something I feel.
Jake is never, you know, he's not stealth in any way, but he's just not pegged as trans most of the time. If he's pegged as gay, yeah. So if anything, he'll be gay bashed, but he won't be trans bashed, you know. Yeah. But he used to, when their first year, every time he went into like a restroom or truck stop restroom, or we would go to, you know, the roadside parks or something, I would just like sit outside the restroom in terror that something bad was going to happen, but didn't.
One thing I'm really getting, even just watching you kind of both together on camera, is like you just seem like you're kind of, I don't know, more in love, or as in love as you were when you first met. And, you know, as we get older and we become more self-aware and all the rest of it, you know, relationships do change and people grow and you grow together. I mean, what are some of the things, I guess, that maybe you know now more, or perhaps value more now than you did when you first met?
You know, our first year together, an older couple told us, you know, the best thing you can do for your relationship, you know, is take it for granted. And at the time, I was like, oh, that's so ridiculous. You know, I never want to be taken for granted. That's ridiculous, you know. And then I finally got, you know, maybe 10 years into the relationship, you know, 10 years of marriage, I finally got what they meant. And what they meant was taking for granted that the relationship would always continue, that this fight or this experience, this moment we're having, this conflict, it's not breaking us up. It's just what we work through to get to the next thing, you know. And so I think that there was something that was like a seismic shift when we passed 10 years, I think, you know. And I think that, you know, that's when we really actually learned that. But yeah, the fact that, you know, we've been through a lot, you know, we've been homeless and living out of our van for 6 months. We have, I'm sure there's other things, but that's the first thing that always comes to mind. So anyway, we've been through ups and downs and the usual, and something like 7 cross-country moves, and we've lived in 30 different places, and, you know, the like thing, you know, starting our own magazine and leaving that, and, you know, all that. So I think that, you know, the more that you do weather, the stronger you get each time, and the more that you know, okay, well, I can make it through the next thing. So I think that, you know, had he transitioned 2 years into our relationship, this would have been a very different story, and I don't know where we would have been, you know. I think that, you know, before we got to marry, so we've been married 23 years now. Before we got married, Jake's longest relationship was like 3 months, you know, so... yeah, seriously.
Yeah, so I mean, that's part of what I learned was, you know, I've learned this about jobs and about relationships. I used to get to this point and where things were hard, and I would just assume that meant it wasn't the right thing. You know, that this was just not the right job, this is not the right girl, this is not the right whatever.
It never was the right girl, clearly.
No, clearly. Diane was the first person who I got to one of those points, and I still wanted to work through it, even though it was hard, even though it was difficult, even though it was uncomfortable, and it wasn't so easy anymore. I still wanted to be here. It was the first time, and so I really worked at it. And I had the similar thing with being a ranger with my job, is that I still in 6 months or a year was at that place where I thought about leaving and wasn't, you know, unhappy about all these different things, and I just didn't. I just stayed on, and I reached this other level of like love, another level of, you know, commitment, both to our marriage and to my job, and those things. I would never have known that when I was younger. I would never have known that if you stick through the hard stuff, the depth of your relationship. I mean, like how much you guys love each other, how committed you are. It grows, and yes, you'll still have those stressors. Like they'll still come up every once in a while. You'll still have these fights. You'll still have whatever. But they stretch out longer, and, you know, once you've gotten used to dealing with them, you know how to sort of deal with them. But when we were young, one of the things that was really hard for Diane was she was very jealous. She was very worried about my cheating, because she had been cheated on by numerous people, and it took a very, very long time before she actually really trusted
yeah.
me.
Oh yeah, no, that's psychotically jealous. Yeah.
Before transition or after, or all the time?
Oh, before. By the time he transitioned, you know, I didn't have. I mean, I had a little bit of concern because, again, you know, when everybody around you was saying, "Oh, he's going to leave you. He's going to leave you," you know, you definitely, you know, it's hard to just keep hearing that, you know. And so when you're the only one who's saying, you know, he's not going to leave me, and moreover, he should be worried about me leaving him, you know. So I think, you know, we were both worried during that transition. We were both worried that year, but not so much about jealousy, just about, like, you know, shifting these, you know, when you first transition, you have these just wildly shifting emotions, and, you know, with the initial rush of the hormones, and you have all these feelings you've never had before, and you have all these experiences and your desires,
you're put back into going through puberty. I mean, literally, you're thrown back into puberty. And think about how stupid you were as a 14-year-old, and then imagine that, you know, because that's kind of what it is. Like, you end up going right back through many of those same, you know, chemical changes in your brain and the same chemical changes in your body, and it makes you just about as stupid as you were back then. And that's really hard to deal with in relationship with a partner who's, you know, an adult. Like, it'd be one thing if she was also going through it, but she's not. So that's really tough, and that's where one of those stressors can be, you know, where couples can really break up, because...
Yeah, and I mean, you know, for us, we were sort of, for me, I was like, okay, you know, if you need to do something, I mean, we both said this to each other in the past, if you need to do something, you know, you do it, you know, and it doesn't mean, yeah, it doesn't mean anything about our relationship, you know, like, we've alternated as to whether I want to hear about it or not, but at this point, yeah, we're both just like, just do it and keep it, you know, do what you have to do in order to experience it. If it's something like, you know, that needs to recur, you know, it's not just like an experience, but you know, woke up today and you're full on a homo. Let's work out how to bring a boy into the relationship or something, because this marriage is going on, you know. So I think we did a lot of that, you know, and fortunately.
Really valuable, like that what you're sharing, because I think a lot of people, you know, you do get stuck after the kind of the initial high and everything's all fun, and it's kind of like there's this assumption, because we don't really get a lot of good education around relationships, that, oh, once it gets hard, oh, that means it's not working, therefore we split up.
Right. I mean, and it is work. Taught that, and especially women are taught that if it's hard, it's not love, it's not real love, you have to work at it. And you're told that, and so it makes it very difficult, because, of course, then you just go, oh, he's not really the one, or she's not really the one, when what it means is that, you know, and that was probably one of the best things that I ever did, was when we were younger, there was a book out by Joanne Llewellyn. It was called something, Butch Femme Voices or something. But what she did was she broke down lesbian relationships, and where it said, like, at these different points, there are stressors. You see stressors at 3 months, 6 months, you know, all these different things. Just knowing that most couples go through these same kind of stressors, and that's why they mostly break up around those time periods, was really helpful, because I could look at my own life and be like, well, here we are at 7 years. They said this is a stressor. No wonder we're having trouble. You know, like, in those ways, it really helped me.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, too, you know, again, during the initial period, you know, first year of transition was, you know, obviously it's the hardest, and it's where really significant changes are happening, and so your partner, you know, is always inside the person that you've always known, that you've always loved, but they are changing dramatically, and it's not just physical, you know. And so I think that, you know, for me, you know, it was dealing with those kinds of things, you know, that was the hardest, but it was where you kind of just say, okay, I've made the commitment to sticking through this, and it's going to be work, and it's not always pleasant work, you know, but...
What did you do, Diane? Did you kind of do this kind of all by yourself? Did you kind of share with friends? Did you get kind of any kind of professional? Because I know Jake did, and you talk about that in the book. What kind of support or help did you get, if any, to get yourself through this?
Not much, actually. You know, I did see a therapist a little bit in the very beginning, and that was just, you know, I sort of, you know, urged Jake to see a therapist like immediately, and then once we were moving forward, I thought, oh, I better talk with somebody. So I did see a therapist a little bit, and then, you know, I did have one friend that I told a little bit more than I told other people. But the truth is I never wanted him to look bad to other people, and so I didn't want to complain about him because I didn't want anybody to turn around and be like, oh man, that is terrible, you should leave, and I didn't want to get sort of negative validation, and I didn't want to validate the people who were saying, all the negative things, right? And so, so I think that I felt like I needed to really put on a positive front, during the tough times and kind of just bear through it. I did read, as much literature as I could find from other people, and I did, it was kind of funny because I didn't see people going through the exact same experience I had, but it was, again, meaningful to just sort of immerse myself into what the experience was and also what trans culture was, because, we had been on the outside of it and we weren't really familiar in the way that we really needed to be in order to be these people that we are. And so I think I did that, but yeah, I was a little afraid to get the support that I would encourage other people to get.
Yeah, in some ways, this is why, we're obviously at a good place. That's why we could write this book. But in some ways, this was really hard because we do like to show, the good side of our relationship. We do like to look like things are going well. We don't like our families to think that we, have unhappy times. We don't like other people to necessarily see the negatives that are going on. And so in that way, like having certain honesty, just like revealing ourselves in this book is, it's really hard because it's not necessarily the things that we would do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, that was the hardest thing.
Definitely a gift that you've given. Like I say, it's a wonderful book, and I think it really helps when we do share our stories, because even though one story is never going to be exactly the same as another's, we can really find it helpful, like you just mentioned, Diane, even just kind of reading about someone who's had a similar experience. It's really kind of a big gift. So I think that's a really good place to wrap up. Thank you both so much for joining me. And I'm just going to switch back here. So just to let you know, you can get a copy of Queerly Beloved from boldstrokesbooks.com. All the links will be below the video, so you can click on there and get your copy. Highly recommend you do get it. It's actually a good thing to get as a gift as well. So thank you both for joining me.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.